So far, we've registered our cells using the old style by passing in a collection view cell class to the register method and the reuse identifier so that it can be dequeued later. And here, when we dequeue it, we always had to cast it to the cell type that we knew it was, and then configure the cell and return it. In this episode, I want to talk about the new cell registration API that is present in iOS 14. So what we're going to do is add a private var here called episode cell registration. Now the type here is UI collection view dot cell registration, and this is generic over two argument types. The first one is the type of cell that we're going to be working with, and the second one is the type of data that will be passed to the cell when we need to configure it. So in this case, our episode. We'll use an implicitly unwrapped optional, and we will set that up here when we're setting up our collection view. So here I'm going to say episode cell registration equals a new UI collection view dot cell registration. And because we're assigning this to a type that already has those generic constraints, we don't need to specify them here. We can just initialize this with this block called a handler. Now this block expects three arguments. The first one is the cell itself. The second one is the index path that we're working with. And the last one is the model. So one thing to note here is that the cell itself, if we look at it, is of type episode cell. It's already strongly typed. It's already casted to the type we expect. And our model is an episode already. So what we can do here is just take all of this code right here. I'm going to cut it and move it up to the cell registration. And now we can change these to just cell. And we can change the name of our model parameter to just episode. So what's nice about this is we can just sort of focus on configuring the cell based on that model, and this code could live essentially anywhere. Now, when we scroll down, when we're dequeuing our cell, we no longer dequeue it with a reuse identifier like this. Instead, we say return collection view dequeue configured reusable cell using some cell registration type. And in this case, it's episode cell registration. Then we just need to pass in that index path and the model we're working with, which is episode. So I'll give this a quick build and make sure we're compiling, and we are. And one thing to note here is that our collection view cell for item at method just got a lot simpler. And this is one thing I like about this API. The first being that we're dealing with strongly typed values here. We don't have to do any casting. We're just passed our model and the strongly typed cell that we want to work with, and we just configure it. The second thing I really like about this is that I can move this code anywhere I want. I could have this live in a separate file or in a separate type. And that also allows me, because this is decoupled from our data source, it allows me a much easier approach of making our data source implemented with a separate file as well, because it is no longer quite so coupled to the exact type of cell that we're working with. It just knows it needs to return some cell, and as long as there's a cell registration configured in the collection view, it can use it and dequeue it, and as long as we pass it in the right data. So this is how we take advantage of cell registration in iOS 14.